This is the IFSCC's first live webinar, and I'm so glad everyone can join us. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Tony. Tony, you can just turn off your camera and start talking. You see the slide there, and you can get those going there. So.
Okay, very good. Like I said, I appreciate everybody being here. Under normal circumstances, I would have had the honor to visit many of the countries you all are calling in from. And I look forward to doing that shortly when things get back to normal. But what I wanted to do today is to talk a little bit about approach to formulation and some of the things we've done in our lab that has helped us in our formulation endeavors. Over the years now, I've been a member of SCC for 40 years now, and over those years, there's been a lot of changes in our industry. When I started in the industry, there were many, many more people working, doing less work than we do today. And what's happened is the fewer people we have, not only with fewer people, the more complicated formulations. In the beginning, if you knew surfactants, you probably could get by. Now, as we all know, there's a lot more to it. So we're doing more and more with less and less. The lead time for products has contracted. So the number of things you need to do just in terms of stability and regulatory and patent searches and all the things that happen have increased the burden on us tremendously. So what's happened in the old days when I first started working, I worked for Henkel, and Henkel used to say on Friday, take the day off and be in the lab, try something you've never tried before, because either you'll develop a new product or you'll never try it again. We don't get that anymore. Formulators are asked to have 3 months of stability done in 3 days, and then people look at you as to why you can't do that. So we need to change the way we think about our formulas. I find it convenient to think in terms of the formula as a platform. There are things that you do already that you know and love, that's accepted by the market, and by looking at those platforms and making small changes, minimal changes, you can study what the effect will be to give new products. Because by and large, aesthetics is what drives product acceptance in many instances. So I'm going to talk about creating. Still many of the things that he did that we still don't understand. He was always willing to try things. So I'd start with his horse as a creativity model for us. I also want to say that silicones and other polymers, if we compare our formulations to a gourmet meal, silicone will be the spice, not the meat and potatoes. What I mean by that is the platform is the basic formula, and making small changes of things that are surface active, that by small changes we change surface tension, we change aesthetics, we change flow rheology properties. That's what I mean by the spice, the things that the customer notices first. So since silicone polymers have the unique ability to lower surface tension of organic oils, they change the aesthetic effect. This allows for formulations that contain less than 1%, sometimes a little bit more, but normally less than 10% of silicones. Now I'm talking today about silicones, but they relate to many surface active polymers as well. So since the formula that you're going to be changing is 99% identical, the time needed to evaluate the change is minimal. We can set up more than one change at a time and go back and actually put a platform together from our basic formula that we can take to marketing. And when they say they want something that's more substantive, more waxy, more powdery, we can understand how to do that ahead of time. Okay, so this means the small amount of silicone or other polymers added to great formulas gives the desired consumer appeal that will amaze and delight. I never cease to be amazed by the things that happen when you go in the lab and try these small changes. I find that a change of 2 dynes per centimeter in a formulation's viscosity of the oil phase, people can assemble in a series of products. So you can feel very small changes. And this is fortunate because it allows us to make formulation changes very quickly. Okay, so I want to start out saying why this works. Silicone fluid, oil and water don't mix. We know oil and water don't mix generally, but now we're introducing a material in its pure form that doesn't mix with either. So as we start to talk about what amphiphilic polymers are, they have portions of the molecule that are soluble in different phases of the three that I'm talking about today. So it has an oil and water soluble, which we're very used to. But how about silicone and oil, silicone and water, or all three together? These turn out to be very, very interesting materials that allow us to make platform changes to our formulas. It also requires us to think very differently. We now think about hydrophilic and hydrophobic because we have oil-loving and water-loving in most of our formulas. And if we handle those two, it used to take care of most of the things we need. However, now we introduce another phase, a silicone phase, that doesn't get along with either of them. So we get more syneresis, we get more incompatibility, we get more challenging of our emulsifier and our stabilization systems and structuring systems and all those things. But it also offers us, when we get it right, an opportunity to really change a formula based upon the solubilities. And we know surface active agents well. We know water-based, water and oil kinds of systems. They form self-assembling units. I used to call them micelles, but my son, who is now graduated more recently than I have, says we shouldn't call them micelles because that's only one. But all of these things that are surface active want to form the lowest surface, the lowest free energy, and get to the surface. By getting to the surface, the concentration to make things work is much lower. We're not talking about detergency and those things that require a high level of concentration. We're talking about things that are a little over the CMC, which can be as low as 0.1%. And then we've got, depending on what else is in there and how we put it together, all kinds of aggregates that come together. Some of the most incredible looking materials, liquid crystals, reverse micelles, you can see some really interesting properties to them. But the reason why I mention it is if I say, what's the CMC of sodium lauryl sulfate in water, everybody can wrap their head around that. But if I say, what is the CMC of CETYL dimethicone in avocado oil, people say, now wait a minute, what is that all about? And that's every bit as legitimate a question. And since most of our platforms will contain products of differing solubilities, different polarities, we're going to see things arrange in self-assembling units, and they'll be more like these systems I'm talking about here rather than sodium chloride and water, which is very uniform top to bottom, left to right. So why silicone? Silicone, water has a surface tension of 72 dynes per centimeter. When you start doing oil phase, it's 32 dynes per centimeter. So we're generally dealing with surfactants that get to that kind of level. But when we start dealing with silicones, we drop into the 20s. Now remember, I said just a short time ago, small differences in surface tension can really be identified in aesthetics. And this gives a great opportunity by using these systems to assemble these self-assembling units so that at the surface of the formula, you can feel the lower surface tension. When you get the lower surface tension, you get spreadability, you get rheology, you get foam. But if you don't lower surface tension, you don't get any of these. And that's a critical thing, and it doesn't need to be a big change. So many other polymers can do this as well. When we go down to fluoro, we put fluoro compounds in here, and now we're down to 15. So if you're foaming a hydroalcoholic solution, like perhaps many people are trying to do these days in making sanitizer, the fact that the ethanol in water is very low surface tension, you have to use a specific silicone to get low enough in surface tension to make the foam. This is an example of fitting the performance requirements to the formulation. So you can take alcohol and water and do different things with them based upon these small additions. Okay, and looking at the specific silicones I want to talk about today, why did I pick them to show you in this approach? Not that they're the best in the world for everything, because you'll have a palette of things you can look at, but that in these particular formulas I can demonstrate the differences. So the first one I want to look at is a surface active product that is soluble in silicone or soluble in oil, depending on the ratio of A to B. So if there's a whole lot of B, which is alkyl, it'll be oil soluble. If there's a whole lot of silicone, it'll be silicone soluble. So if you think about reversing those systems, we talk about oil and water and water and oil. Now I want to talk about a particular kind of surface active ingredient that would tend to generate self-assembling units that have oil on the inside, silicone on the outside, or the other way around. Now, when you start thinking about syneresis is just getting that wrong. Syneresis is oil coming out of a regular emulsion. Syneresis is water coming out of an invert emulsion, and all combinations of there. Exactly the same goes on here. So if you have a lipstick, for example, that has syneresis, if you go ahead and you have a product that you leave the pigment out of, and you go back and look at it, if you have syneresis, you'll see either an oil phase that doesn't clear, or one that has a very, very broad melting point. You can actually titrate in the right ratio of alkyl to silicone and an alkyl silicone to get to clarity. Now, people say a lipstick without pigment isn't a lipstick, but if pigment is in there, you can't see the clarity. So once you do that, you go back, put it together, and everything works fine. So I want to be talking today about alkyls that will change the solubility. And the formulas we're going to talk about, or the formula we're going to look most at, is an emulsion. So you have a water phase and an oil phase. So you've got three of those different systems working with each other, or not. First one I want to talk about is Q resins. Q resins everybody likes because they're powdery, they have a very crystalline structure, they go into long wear lipstick initially, very heavily. They also give a nice dry powdery feel. Now, although we say MQ resins are one thing, the ratio of M to Q is absolutely critical in terms of its performance. You go from very linear kinds of materials to very structured kind of crystals. So I'm dealing with a crystalline one today, but I can refer you to other information if you're interested in an article on it. So that's the first one. Second one is silicone gum. Now, silicone gum is a silicone fluid of tremendously high molecular weight. Viscosities of 500,000. And that differentiates them from the elastomers, which is one of the other ones where there's cross-linking. So as the gum as that A value on that structure gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you get to a point where you've got a gel. You can reach into a 5-gallon pail and pull it up and let go, and you'll see it slowly start to go back in. This has one kind of feel to it because of its structure, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the formula. Elastomers, one of our favorite things these days, the dimethicone, vinyl dimethicone cross-polymer. The degree of cross-linking, the degree of the blue units you see above in the structure will determine whether you get something that's crumbly and resinous, much more like the MQ kind of stuff, or something that is more elastomeric. It has that kind of very nice powdery feel. Now, aesthetics being king, that powdery feel, most people love it in a formula. So that's being able to put that in a platform is very important, I think. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is a mixed alkyl. Now, alkyls of a C22 variety are liquid materials, and they form domains. 26 is solid. So part of that molecule, we have two different alkyls. One is liquid, one is a solid. And when they come together, you get a tremendous modification of rheology. Our customers call these kind of things liquid petrolatum. When you put it on the skin, you get a nice cushion, like petrolatum, but the play time is very low. So it breaks quickly and the rheology spreads, which gives a very interesting kind of modification to the platform. We also have one, we're going to talk about the water phase. This is a high HLB emulsifier with silicone. And as most people are aware, the work that Johan did many years ago showed that when you're making an emulsion, the emulsifier is tremendously important in the initial feel. How much EO is in there, how much other things are in there will change the stickiness. So the ratio of A to B and the value, in this case that's 9, in changing those you can make emulsifiers that are high HLB that are not sticky. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go back and take a formulation that has an aqueous phase and an oil phase and modify those phases by adding these polymers I just discussed and going back and seeing what it does in a salon test to look at, first, does it change surface tension? And secondly, what does it do to the aesthetics? Now, I don't think I can overemphasize for people who are in the lab the desirability to test surface tension. Like I said, small changes people pick up quickly. And when you can lower the surface tension, you're getting your material to the interface where its performance is most critical. If it stays in solution, you really minimize the performance, or you need a lot more material. So a fully water-soluble PEG dimethicone really gives very little in terms of substantivity or conditioning. So that's one of the areas we want to talk about. Have surface tension ability to look at it as something that you find interesting in your laboratory. And you don't need a fancy one. Okay, and why I'm saying that is this is CETYL dimethicone, a C16 put into soybean oil. In this particular case, it looks like a CMC that you'd see with sodium lauryl sulfate in water. You see a breakpoint at around 20, but we're going to define something called RF50 because some of these will give really strange looking curves and when these materials interact with each other. And that's one of the most important things in a formulation. I can come to you and say, this is what CETYL dimethicone does in soybean oil, and that you should try it in a formula, and your answer would be, well, I don't have soybean oil with CETYL dimethicone in it. I have 12 components in my formula, and they all interact with each other. What's it going to do then? And that's why more and more of our work needs to be directed, even on a raw material basis, to formulations that the customer requires as being interesting. So if you look at this, you can look, we dropped the surface tension from 31.4 down to 24. Now this one is not a particularly wonderful number in terms of CNC, and we have some things that are much lower, but shows the example of the kinds of things we're talking about. The same material, when you put it in mineral oil, you get a lowering of surface tension, but where's the inflection point for the CMC? You really don't see it. So that's why we're calling RF50. What's the percentage you need to get the surface tension at 25? And then you can compare the efficiency of how these things work in your formulas. Okay, and in a typical example, we have a product here where it's ethyl methicone, which is added to sweet almond oil, and you can see the numbers are much lower. We have some things that are less than 0.5% that lower surface tension. Now, the interesting thing is these polymers can lower surface tension and alter rheology or give a powdery feel, so we have to pick the right one. Okay, so minimally disruptive technology and minimally disruptive formulation. This is the concept that you have a platform, you make small changes to. And if you have an oil phase, by all means, put the additive in and compare it to the one without it, or compare it to the one with different additives. You can very quickly save a lot of time by seeing what doesn't work. Edison once said he didn't learn how to make a light bulb, he learned to make 3,000 non-working light bulbs. So once we understand that, it's like getting that Friday afternoon off to try something you never got a chance to try before. But it puts it in a more structured way. Now this rather busy looking slide is what the formulas are I'm going to be talking about. We have a water phase that has water, glycerin, alcohol, and butylene glycol in it. We have quite a collection of oils in there, and this gets back to my commentary before about many of these oils don't get along with each other. When I say don't get along, they're not soluble in each other. We often want to really simplify things. We want to be soluble or insoluble, and we want to say what goes into what phase. Dimethicone, what is it soluble in? Well, the answer is what viscosity. So it's a lot more complicated than simple rules. So oils and petrolatum and acids and all of those things only coexist with each other when you get a good formulator putting them together. And that's good news for us because we're never going to be replaced by a computer because there's aesthetics and other things we need to know in it. But specifically what I'm looking for is a little bit past, right below lanolin alcohol, there's the ethyl methicone, which was the material that I showed that had very low surface tension with a small amount of add. It doesn't have an alkyl on there that's large, so it's not going to change rheology, but it is going to lower surface tension, so we can look at that difference. And that's Formula 2. If you look at Formula 3 has our MQ resin in it. Now these things will be added to the oil phase, not the water phase, with the exception of the surfactant. So we want to see how that powdery feeling, how those other things get carried over into formulation by putting them at 1% into the formula. The next one is the 1% of the silicone gum, the very, very high viscosity product that is non-cross-linked. So it's going to be very different than the dimethicone, vinyl dimethicone cross polymer, which is the next one. That's going to give that nice powdery feel, but still very different from a resin, the MQ resin. And then finally, it's an HLB 10.6 PEG 8 dimethicone, which is engineered to have a good amount of silicone solubility in it. So by cutting back on the length of the EO chain, we get less stickiness. The procedure to put it together is there. And so if you batch a number of these through at the same time, you can actually make a matrix of the combinations of things you want to see. Okay, the first thing we want to do is to make these formulas and see what's been upset in the formulas about analytical evaluation that we can immediately say is related to the change we just made. Now this is a 1% change. By and large, if you look at the top viscosity information, the viscosities are, for a number of them, are pretty good, except for the one where we added a water-soluble emulsifier in there, and we just knocked the viscosity way down. So we have to go back and to change that formulation-wise if that has the feel we want. But by and large, these are white creams. They have the stability at room temperature and at 45 degrees. We have, looked at the feel, developed, hey, this is a good one. Well, it's the control you expect to be good because it's a duplication of a commercial material we took off the shelf. What we did is we brought the commercial material in, sent it into the lab for analysis, then sent it over to our formulator and said, hey, show us what you've got that has properties like number one, which is the control, and then we'll go back and make changes to it. So what we say to our customers is we don't duplicate your formula, we make our approximation of it that has the same kind of properties. And then we go back and make the other changes to it. And we find most people are very excited by being able to cut through the formulation work to make things a little easier, at least to start. So now we're going to go back and here's a list of what they are to the right. And to the left is sensory parameters. We have a pretty good group of people testing these things. And again, the starting material is pretty good. And you'd expect it to be because of the fact that, it's somebody's commercial formula. But we want to look at what things are we actually changing by making these additions to the formula. So number one, if you look at it, you get 79 points out of it. So 79, so it's a good formula. As we go back and start making the changes to it, now ethyl methicone, we're looking simply at lowering the surface tension from in the low 30s to about mid 20s. And you can see where that has some kind of effect. You can see that we get it. It's actually the only thing that's increased the absorption, the wetness of the material. And it's 0.5, so it's not a huge number, but we're seeing trends here. And we can go back and modify things a little bit more appropriately with other kinds of materials to put in there. But you can see a difference if you go back and look at these. Certainly 2 versus 5. If you put a dimethicone, vinyl dimethicone cross polymer, you change the perception of wetness and absorption of the wetness, where a lot of the other things did not do that. So we have point counterpoint here. We have we know something now that will change the wetness, making it less wet, and something that will change the wetness, making it more wet. So we're starting to understand what these things are going to do in the formula. Now, as we go to the next formula, spreadability, you can also see lowering surface tension improves the spreadability. That's pretty neat. That's one of the things we had talked about before. It doesn't change the rheology because we don't have the alkyls yet, but it does change spreadability. When we go looking at getting rid of tackiness, a quick spreading film will feel less tacky because it'll be thinner. So you're actually decreasing the tack. So we're starting to change how cushion and playtime interact with each other. And generally speaking, we don't think that way. Normally, we'll come back and say, okay, honey has a very high cushion and a very high playtime. You put it on your finger and rub it on the back of your hand, as cosmetic chemists do throughout the world. You'll feel that difference in height between your finger and your hand as a pretty big difference with honey. And it also lasts a long time. By this additive, your cushion can be the same, and you can change the playtime, make it slower. So if you're making a massage oil or some kind of product along those lines, that kind of change can be very helpful. Then you go back and look at gloss. Well, it didn't really affect the gloss, did it? Film residue, really, I don't think anything we did changed the film residue feel, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We did change the greasiness, though. And basically, the things that we did, regardless of the additive, decreased the greasiness. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It depends on what your formulation is looking to do. Sometimes it may feel better. I'll give you an example. We have a formula that has oil in it, and it has a greasiness to it, and it's used in serums for skin after they've been treated with a laser. So the skin is very roughed up, looks sort of like a bad sunburn. And the very first thing you want to do is put on something that's occlusive. So you put this material on, it's got a greasiness to it, it's got a great cushion to it, and you know it's a hydrophobic material. And you use that for a couple of days to minimize transepidermal water loss and to allow the skin to start to repair. We put 1% of one of our additives to it into the formula, and it changes the rheological properties of that formula. Only 1% change. Now it's the hydrophilic product. It's the one that transepidermal water losses come up. It's the one that has a completely different feel. And when you look at the formula, you say, hey, wait a minute, what is this with this thing? It looks like it's the same product. But those kinds of changes will be very important when you try to figure out what it is that marketing wants. Sometimes marketing doesn't know what they want, and if you have more than one variation in feel and variation in how these products work, you're way ahead in presenting it. So when you go back and start looking, you can also see that there's improvement in softness, and again related to the spreadability. As I go to number three is the MQ resin. So it really did nothing in terms of the wetness. It did help improve the spreadability because it also lowered the surface tension. It has improved the tackiness, lowered the tackiness. It has improved the absorbency. In this case, we're actually seeing some gloss come from this. The more crystalline materials seem to do better in terms of gloss. Film residue stayed the same. We did see a change in greasiness, again, film concentration and the feel of the dry feel of the resin. So we can go back and look at changes. We even see a small change. I don't know if that's terribly significant, but a small change in tackiness. And everything feels softer because it's a material that has a different feel to it. The silicone gum, number 3, actually didn't really do very well. It did change the absorbency. That's the one thing that, and made it less greasy. So you can go back and look at these different fields, and we're talking about what we're looking at in our own salon, which is probably going to be different than how you would describe your own product to your own internal people. It never ceases to amaze me the number of terms we have for the same thing that are used differently by different people in different companies. You know, scroopiness and scratchiness and all of those kinds of things. It might be interesting eventually to try to get some common language in that way of thinking. Okay, now Formula 6, this is the one that has the multi-domain. This is the one that's going to modify rheology. And if you go back and look at it, you can see spreadability is quite good. You know, most of the silicones we do things with, the spreadability is good. As we go down the list, we make a change in tackiness. The greasiness has dropped down, but in essence, many of the things we're doing offer changes to the scale we're looking at now. And the interesting thing with that is they also are things that perhaps when you sit down and look at them, evaluating one to the other for commercial acceptability, your goals may be different than what we're looking at here. Finally, the emulsifier, if we go down and look at it, let's see. The non-greasiness is better. The silkiness is good, and the softness is good. So we make some, primarily softness is the big change. And I think that softness is getting away from the stickiness of the EO by putting more silicone into the backbone. Okay, so as we start to look at this, we'll take the control as the thing that we're going to be comparing to. And remember, this is a commercial material, so there's a lot of work been done to make it better. Dry feel, improved spreadability, and a lower surface tension. And now as you remember these things that we're looking at, the scale that we used is a short one, so they look like small numbers, but the consumer can perceive these differences. You'd have no problem separating one from the other with a 0.5 to 1. A 1 for sure is a big change. So here the ethyl methicone helps with the spreadability, lowers the surface tension. What it basically does is ethyl methicone will make oils feel more like D4 or D5. They're spreading it out not because it's evaporating, but because it makes a thinner, more uniform film. These things will also help improve the SPF by giving a more uniform film. Okay, the next one. As we start to look now, we're going to get a powdery dry feel, less tacky, and better absorption by going to the MQ product. Okay, and that, you know, those kind of properties can be very desirable in one kind of formula or another, depending on what the marketing objective is in doing it. Okay, the silicone gum gives a softening effect and cuts down on the greasiness, and you can sort of see why. You've got to have other things in there to spread it out well and disperse it well in the oil phase. But these materials are used in processing aids and used in a variety of hair products because when they're spread out thin, they have a very nice feel to them. Okay, the vinyl dimethicone cross polymer. It initially has a more wetness to it, but it's less tacky and more powdery on dry down. Now that kind of makes it different than the MQ resin, which has got the powdery feel and is less tacky from the beginning. The initial wetness can be modified. Now, one of the things that amazes me with the products we make is the competing of properties we want in them. And what I mean by that is if we're putting together an emulsion, one of the first things we look at is what does the emulsion feel like? How stable is it? What kind of properties do I want in it? How is it going to feel when I first put it on the skin? But then you have a time where the water starts to evaporate and you see and feel the emulsifier. This was one of Johan's big contributions to our field in skincare. And when that happens, the consumer gets a feel of how luxurious this product's going to be. And so we have to be very careful that we do it the right way. But then all of a sudden that's gone and you feel the oil phase. So the oil phase has to spread and has to have a good feel, as does the breaking of the aqueous phase to expose the emulsifier, and you have to have a stable emulsion when you put these all together. The first time we've made sunscreens years ago, we said, boy, these are the most wonderful sunscreen emulsions everybody's ever seen. And in essence, they were. They felt really good. But when the fact that they had a lot of highly ethoxylated emulsifiers in them, they had a stickiness. And then they weren't water resistant because there was a lot of surfactant in there to maximize the emulsion stability. So all of the formulations we put together are a compromise between what things we want in what phase and what's more important than the other. Okay, the next one then is the multi-domain. This I think, is a really neat product. It has a very luxurious kind of feel. It has an increased cushion and a decreased play time. And I think you'll see some very major differences in that. Finally, when we go back and look at the emulsifier, because it has more silicone in it, it's going to be less sticky in the emulsion. It also, if you remember, we lowered the viscosity of this product, so we'd have to go back and change that as well, go back and correct the viscosity. Since we were primarily interested in the other aspects of this formula when we did it, we never really did a lot of work with changing that, but there's a lot of things that you can do to get the viscosity back, or perhaps you may not even want that high viscosity if you want something that can be sprayed. Okay, so here's the overall results. If you actually do this, if you actually put it in a formula and make these small changes, we would pick the ones that you felt are the most desirable to what marketing wants. In doing things with well-established products, we once went through and made 6 products that we submitted to a very large customer. And of course, the thing that they liked best was the one that we're currently working on because it solved an initial problem. Small amounts of these changes do in fact make differences you can feel. We're talking about the aesthetics, and we're talking about them going to the surface. And since aesthetics is what we feel first, the changes, it doesn't take much of a change in terms of the number to carry into the finished formulas. And I would suggest to you that you get a couple of these things to try out, and try them first in the oil phase to convince yourself that these feels are real. If I were doing it with you today, I would actually have the formulas to show you. But the way we're set up, it's not possible to do that at the moment. So I'll try to make an arrangement to come and visit. I'd like to go to as many places as I can, because one of the things that I find most exciting about doing new things is doing them with great people that come from interesting places. Okay, I want to look briefly at the microscope slides of the emulsions. The control is the top one, and the formulas next to them are the, as we go down in the row, we got a 100 and 400 time. Formula 1, the first row is control. Formula 2 is ethylmethicone. Formula 3 is the Q resins. As you go back and look at them, you can see that there are differences in there, particularly as you get to the Q resin. The Q resin is particularly in the 100 time, you can see the particles are more uniform and smaller. As I continue along then to the last two, you can see that in the case of the gum, you get some interesting size and modality to it, where the vinyl dimethicone cross polymer has less of an effect. And then finally, when we start doing things with multi-domain, one of the interesting things about multi-domain is there's a solid in there. So what happens when you put the solid domain material in, you heat up the product to make the emulsion. Well, everything's liquid at that point, and this particular alkyl silicone stays in the oil phase, and as it starts to cool down, you start to generate some structure to the oil. Now, viscosity of the oil phase is something, as it goes up, it improves emulsion stability. So this is a way to actually improve your emulsion stability in addition to changing the rheology. When you go back and look at the PEG 8 dimethicone, you can see it also changes. So those two are very different than the other ones. So the emulsion, we're doing things that affect emulsion stability now, which is a very desirable thing in many areas. Okay, now what I want to do is, I'm getting close to my time here, and I wanted to thank you for this. I wanted to get you to start thinking about making the changes and to develop your own selection of materials that perhaps perform better than some of these we've looked at, because this was a particular formulation, and you know, it was a very good one to begin with. But if you start to play with these things and use these things, you'll become oriented toward picking them up and putting them into formulas when a project comes in. And what we find is, particularly when we're asked to duplicate a product with some of our materials in them, this is really the only approach that we can do that will allow us to make the changes that we desire in an expeditious fashion. So with that, I thank you for listening. I thank IFSCC for allowing me to do this, and hope to see you in your local area in the not too distant future.
All right, Tony, thank you so much. Why don't you turn on your camera now?
Okay.
And we can answer a few questions. Now, if you had questions, a lot of people were putting questions during the thing, and I've gone through and compiled those questions so we can get started. Just a quick one. In that last slide, a couple of people had mentioned 6 and 7 microscope. Those pictures look very similar.
Yeah, they should be similar. They shouldn't be identical.
Okay.
You know, I will check into that, and you know, because the emulsion, both of them switched the emulsion, made smaller particles.
Sure. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to go through questions. We have about 15 minutes scheduled, and I've gone through and compiled the questions sort of in order of asked. Tony, a couple of questions, and feel free to post some more questions if you have them as we go through. A couple of people had asked the question, how do you go about getting the panel to evaluate the sensory aspects of the formula? Were they trained, or are these the kind of differences that consumers might see?
Yeah, we have 2 different panels that we use. One is an internal panel, and the other is you know, where we go out and generally there'll be people that are related to some of the people who are on or our employees. So we do both. And yeah, what we've seen is that the small changes actually you can pick up because it is in the aesthetics. Whether something's powdery or non-powdery is something that people can pick up. And you know, since we gave them an 8 to 10 and started out with an 8 with the formula we worked on in this particular case, you know, it's perhaps we should go to 100 and not 10.
But the bottom line is these are differences. Even though the numbers look small, these are differences that consumers even could see.
You would feel, if we pass around the bottles, you would feel them to be, many of them, different.
Okay. We had a few questions on the formulas. One was wondering why Formula 7, the viscosity was so high. Was that just the emulsion particles were smaller?
Was 7 high or 7 low? I thought 7 was...
that was on slide 29.
Let me go back.
Okay.
Do I have to go one at a time, or is there a quicker way to do it?
Uh,
I thought 7, the one with the added emulsifier, was lower viscosity, not higher.
yeah, I didn't see. So it's slide 29.
How do I get to that?
Do you have it open on your PowerPoint? You can just switch over to there.
Used it right from your.
Okay. You know what? Let's just move on to other questions. So we'll come back to that. What percentage do you think the formula changes do not require repetition of patch test, stability test, or challenge testing? So if you make a little change in your formula, when is a change so much that you've got to do more testing?
Well, what we found is that we have actually full testing on the raw materials. So having testing on the raw materials and putting, we've got some people with read across that will look at, I would say 5% maybe is a high number.
Okay.
If you had more than 5% or at 5%, you probably want to go down and do the basic RIPT headcam kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a reasonable guide. Okay, we had a few people comment about this, questions about this. What do you think of the reputations of silicones now? Some consumers are avoiding them, and is this still going to be a viable ingredient category in the future?
Okay, well, and you will notice that when I talked about these things, I said other polymers as well. So these abilities to test these things are not just isolated to silicones. Although silicones, my personal belief is that silicones will continue, but in much lower levels. They'll be more the spice than the meat and potatoes. Because I think what's going to happen is as we start looking at regulations coming in related to 0.1% max of D4, D5, and D6 that's coming on both leave-on and wash-off, it's not going to be easy.
Right. Yeah. And that sort of bleeds into the next question. Can we get these results in formulating without silicones?
In fact, if you pick the right formulas, and we have natural polymers that do these kinds of things as well, the answer is yes. Powdery fill is probably the hardest because, and why that is if you go back and take a powdery feel silicone, to get to one that's powdery field, you have to do an Edison. You have to make 200 you throw away. So powdery feel is not as simple as having a cross-link and having a non-cross-link. It's having the specific structure. And we often compare it to boxes. The powdery feel, it's those molecules that are boxes that are tall with little diameter so you can knock them over and get the powder out of them. The square boxes that are the same all the way around are a lot less powdery. I don't know if that makes sense, but the structure function is a big deal.
Yeah, it seems like a complicated characteristics because it's so subjective about what does powdery feel like. So each consumer might have a different perspective.
Yes, and I think one of the things that's going to be really critical in the future is powdery feel is the old pinnacle of what a cosmetic feel should be. I think somebody will come around and think of something else that has a different feel that becomes as well accepted. Remember that most of the things that we're doing, particularly in elastomers, are in solvents. So you've got a 10%, 15%, maybe 20% active.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense.
Or isododecane or isohexadecane. So all of those things are going to come under scrutiny in a formulation. And this approach I believe, will help you pick the replacements for the things you need to replace. If I got to take something out that has D5 in it, why not look at a second cell when you're putting it in that's non-silicone? So that it opens the possibility. But I do think we're in for more regulation.
Mm-hmm.
That we're in for the consumer becoming more and more educated. And we're going to have better answers for them in terms of the things that stay in.
In terms of the same sort of theme of silicones and their concern of formulating with them, do you have any suggestions on alternatives to silicones that formulators who want to stick with, say, a natural formulation strategy would use, or would something to pursue to experiment with?
There's been a lot of work done recently related to polyesters, related to some polyurethanes that can do some of those things. A lot of it's been done also it relates to acrylates as well because they're microplastics, We're going to be looking for replacements there at some point in time. And there are natural products that can fit in using this kind of approach.
You know, that topic of microplastics is an interesting one because while some groups define the microplastic as a specific particle of a type of ingredient, others kind of said anything that's plastic or anything that's a polymer is considered a microplastic.
No,
do you have any thoughts on microplastics?
Quite a precise spin coating and glass transition temperatures and solidness. If you got liquid, it's not a plastic.
Yeah, I've seen there is a consumer group that considers even carbomer a microplastic.
If that does spin coat, so it is plastic.
Okay.
Maybe we have the wrong definition, and maybe we're saying the wrong things. That part of the problem is definitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is very concerning for formulators in the future if pretty much all polymers are starting to be considered microplastics. That could represent a big problem.
We'll come that far. First thing is it's spin coatable. If it's spin coatable, it means it forms a film that is solid.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times, if you put it on a microscope slide and stick it under a microscope, you know whether it looks like it's plastic or not.
There's another question that came in, a more specific one about silicones. Does PEG 8 dimethicone have an impact on the SPF?
It does if it gives a smaller particle size emulsion. All gets down to the film, what that film looks like. So if you can get a thinner film that's more uniform, it's like putting on a bulletproof vest that has holes in it. You know, film thin and uniform, so that we don't, because all you have to do is have one hole, and you know if the photon gets through there, then you get a fail. So emulsion stability and water resistance and all those things that interrelate. It's really, when you think about what we're doing, we're threading a mighty small needle, and if you look at all the interactions that go on, and I'm speaking to the choir here because you're the one who does it all the time. But I mean, to try to get it to come off when you want it, to stay stable when you want it, to spread when you want it, and to give an SPF, that's an amazing combination.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we've got a few more minutes, and we'll get to as many of these questions as we can. Here's a question about hexyl laurate. Is that a reasonable replacement for silicones?
Hexyl won't give the same dryness. It will give spreadability. And the problem is, again, we're back to definitions. If you put it into your formula in one of these changes, change out some and try it, it will get to the surface. And what you got to do is to find out if your marketing people accept that dry feel as a replacement feel. And the interesting thing is, if you go back and take D5 and put it in a beaker and leave it on your desk, and put D4 in a beaker and leave it on your desk, come back a day later, the D4 will essentially have disappeared. D5, there's a lot of it there. It also feels dry because the surface tension is so low. You know, straight D5 has a surface tension around 18. So it's going to spread and give a thin film, which we perceive as dry.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
Entirely different than if you're putting it in mascara, where you need an evaporation to form the film to get below the concentration of entanglement. So in some applications, yes, some applications, no. So we have to give you, I think, a way to formulate, to test these things out and convince yourself that this is what you want.
Right. There was a question of those formulas that you showed, and maybe this has kind of been answered, but which of the formula do you think would be the best?
From the point of view, I guess best is what went commercial, and what went commercial was the multi-domain. The one with thickening of the oil phase, so we got a little better emulsion stability, smaller particles. We got a rheology change when you spread the oil on the skin. That actually, we could see much more benefit from it, and it has become a commercial material.
Well, it's a good answer. I mean, usually the answers to which is the best is it depends on what your application is. But I'm glad you had an answer there. Here's another question about the incorporation of this material. So how do you formulate, when you're formulating, how do you incorporate these in? Do you have to use different techniques or anything?
No, you basically put the ones that are oil soluble in the oil phase, and that was most of what we did. The last one was just the emulsifier, and that goes into the water phase. Now, one of the things that I think is particularly interesting, and the group may not find it interesting, but I always get back to it. We say things are soluble or insoluble. In the real world, it doesn't work that way. Very few have infinite solubility, and very few things have zero solubility. So how it partitions in those phases, small changes to that change emulsion stability and all that very quickly. So you're going to have a small amount of silicone oil in the water phase. And in fact, Graham Barker, who I worked with many years ago, who was a really good emulsion guy, his trick was always put a little bit of water in the oil phase before you start making the emulsion. Half a percent.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, I think we got time for one more here. And this is more, I guess, editorial, and it's more of a marketing thing, but how would you convince consumers about the advantages of using silicones when they have a bad reputation, especially in countries like India?
Okay, one of the things we need to talk about is, again, when we speak generalizations, we lose meaning. Silicones, like I said, are not going to disappear. Silicones have some unique properties, they do. But silicone elastomer is very different than silicone fluid. If I'm putting silicone fluid in as basically an oil solvent, that's probably where it's going to disappear. If I could add 200 parts per million of an elastomer to a product and get a nice powdery feel, and there are some things that are starting to do that now, that's the direction to go. When we say silicone, there's methicones, dimethicones, there are cross-linked, there are organic cross-linked. It's just a huge swath of things to think about that I wouldn't suggest you give up on any one particular material till you get somebody in to explain these things.
It's a great point.
And I think that's where we're looking to you in the future to bring some of those things, say, hey, look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for attending this webinar. We had nearly 200 people at one point on the webinar, and we still have almost 150 people. So thank you. I'm glad you found this helpful. If you have ideas for webinars on topics, please let us know. You can add to the chat. I'll leave the chat open a little bit longer. We're going to have a replay of this coming up. As soon as we can get the video working and edited it up, we'll have that going for a replay page. But thank you again. We're going to do more of these. This was our first, Tony. You did an excellent job of kicking off our webinars. I hope everybody found it helpful, and we'll see you next time. Everybody stay safe.
My email address was on the end of the presentation. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks so much, Tony. We've got almost 100 people online right now, so that's great. We've got Lorena from Spain. Hello, Spain. We've got Hu Ling from Singapore. Hello from Singapore. We've got Mary Lynn from New York. Welcome, welcome.
I can hear you now.
I can hear you, Tony. Why don't you turn on your video and say hello to everyone? And say hello.
Oh.
There we go. The video is working. Let's just do an audio check. Can everybody hear me talking? And can we hear Tony talking?
Can you hear me talking?
I can hear you. It seems like it's working. Oh, wait, we got Miriam from France. We've got Giovanna from Italy. Michelle from the Philippines. Chile. Isabel from Chile. Hello. Sergio from Mexico. Boy, we've got people from around the world. From Nigeria, Pedro from Mexico, Frank from the Netherlands. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We're very excited. Tony, can you believe all the people here? We've got over 100 already here. Wow.
It's wonderful having everybody here, and I thank everybody for taking part out of their day to come, and also thank the IFSCC for setting this up. Many of the places you're coming from, I've had the honor to be, and I look forward to going back when things get a little bit more normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do. That's one of the big things about this pandemic is I miss traveling and seeing places and speaking to everybody. Yeah.
I covered 250,000 miles on Delta last year.
Wow. That's
1,500. So
going to be a lot less this year, huh?
1,600 so far.
Wow. We've got Kazi from India. Zodwa from South Africa. Tony, you were in South Africa. Was that last year?
It was last year, yes, for a conference.
Excellent. There's cosmetic chemists from around the world. This is just amazing. Gracia from Venezuela. Hello, welcome. Oliver from France. Welcome. Or bonjour. When I was in high school, I took 2 years of French, and I think I know 100 words.
That's 90 more than I do.
Okay, it sounds like our technology is working well. We're going to get started, everyone, in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I like to start at the top of the hour. Oh, we've got somebody checking in from Argentina. Sylvia from Argentina. John from Australia. Wow. Or is that Austria? No, Australia. I'm not wearing my glasses, so I can't really read them. But I like the no glasses look for the camera here. So there we go. Australia, we've got Buenos Aires, Argentina. Hello, Andrea. Barcelona, Daniela from Barcelona. We've got Anne from Belgium. Hello. Nepal, Ishan from Nepal. Not a country I've been to. Linda from the Philippines. Wow. Well, this is just great. I'm glad the technology is working. So before we get started with the main presentation, let me just do a little housekeeping here. First of all, I'm Perry Romanowski from the IFSCC Education Committee, and this is the first official IFSCC webinar series. We hope to do a series of these webinars, and they're free for all IFSCC members. Our first one is with Tony Olenek on minimal disruptive formulation in skincare. But first, let me tell you, most of you have found the chat. So if you have a question while the presentation is going on, feel free to type it in the chat. If there's any technology problems, just type it in the chat and let me know. If there's a significant one, we'll break in with Tony and get that fixed. But I should tell you, if you are in an area where your internet is not really strong, you might sometimes see a choppiness, and that's why when we do the main webinar here, we're going to turn off the videos, so you won't see us. You're going to hear Tony, and I'll be in the background monitoring the chat. But if you have a question as he's going through, be sure to type it in the chat, and then after his presentation, we're going to go through and answer some of the questions. All right, without further ado, it's the top of the hour. I like to do these things on time. Kentaro from Japan, hello from Japan. John from South Africa, hello. Well, thank you everybody so much for attending. And I think we're ready to get started. Are you ready, Tony?
I am ready.